Don't ignore print. Naturally, most of our attention in the podcast and as church communicators is online. We tend to do a lot of digital stuff, and with good reason. I mean, it's low budget, relatively low time, depending on how much you can do, but you can do it on a small amount of time. And it's likewise where people spend a lot of their time. So it makes sense. But as a byproduct of that, everyone else is doing it. So you've got loads of competition. And I'm not talking competition from other churches. I'm not even only talking about competition from other people locally, but everywhere. You know, you can target people from all over the world. And whilst churches probably aren't doing so much of this, unless we're talking about those much bigger churches, because we tend to focus just on our community, you can bet that every business out there who has potential customers in your community are going to be focusing on them as well. And that's all competition to getting the people that you want to see your content, getting their eyes on that content. On the other hand, print publicity tends to be pretty localized because you actually have to get it into people's hands. And obviously you can post stuff out, but generally you will find that if stuff is going through people's doors, the competition is going to be takeaway menus and local estate agents, maybe in the run up to a general election, some leaflets from them as well. But you won't have that same level of competition. So whilst there are other things to consider with print and this costs and all things like that, we're going to think about it today from a strategic point of view, and also thinking about whether there's any low-hanging fruit of things, you know, like church signage, which most churches have. If you do it well, it can be like a quick win. So yeah, thinking about print today and how to do it well. And we're going to start off with thinking about door-to-door.
Door-to-door, which terrifies me as a millennial because I don't want to be going and knocking and talking to strangers. That sends me out in a panic. But actually, door-to-door for church comms and for literature of any type, we will talk about a couple of different options. You know, it is a good thing to think about because yes, print has a cost, but actually there's also some brilliant opportunities with it.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing and the biggest thing that kind of is the deciding factor is the finances. So obviously print does cost money in a way that digital doesn't. I mean, you still have to spend time designing, but actually then you do have to spend pennies to print it. And even if you can do it yourself or find somewhere relatively cheap to do it, but, you know, please, we'd really recommend you not to go for the absolute cheapest with the thinnest, shiniest, you know, weirdest,
horrible floppy paper.
Yeah, you know, just don't do that. Don't do that. You know, you do still have to think about actually what it is that you're going to be putting out there, and actually it needs to be worth it because it's a social media post. You can change it 2 minutes later and upload it. Once it's printed, it's printed. And, you know...
And it might be as well that when you're thinking about putting stuff through people's doors, that you are considering paying to have it delivered, and that is a legitimate option, but it's obviously not cheap.
No.
If you are opting for the cheaper option of delivering it yourself and putting it through people's letterboxes, you know, that will take time. So in addition to the time to actually design your publicity, it will take time to get it out there, even if that's not a one-person thing, even if you're sharing it out. Yeah.
And actually just the logistics of working out where you're going to be delivering them to. But I don't think that it's a bad thing that that you are requiring people to get involved and to spend the time to actually drop them off door to door. You know, it's an opportunity for your congregation and church family to get involved, and you know, it can be quite a nice thing to do together. So as you know, if you're doing it in teams, you can deliver and chat to people, but also chat to each other and get to know each other. You know, it's a great way to put people who maybe don't know each other or don't have an opportunity to spend a lot of time together. So it's great for kind of fellowship, but actually also an opportunity to pray for the houses that you're passing. And that was one thing that a couple years ago, my local churches together, they did Christmas cards that I think they distributed to the whole town. And they said, one of the things we do with it, we pray for every house as we're delivering. And I just thought, okay, then that's worth it, because I think that's such a powerful thing to be doing.
Yeah. And as much as you said, you know, it's something that millennials find scary. Actually, it's something that everyone finds scary, but it's a chance to actually meet people in your local community face to face. And that's something which is increasingly difficult to do, especially if you're in a commuter area where people just aren't there as much in the week. So that's a really important thing. Now, obviously how widely you reach out. I mean, you talked about the logistics of deciding where to deliver. That's going to depend on your church context. And if you're in a town, you might have a lot more people living in a smaller space immediately around your church, so you might not reach out as far, which can have a bit of a disconnect, because a lot of times in towns, churches will travel in. So you need to think carefully about that. And that's a good reason to get people within your congregation delivering to their local areas as well, because it might be that if people are travelling in but they want to deliver to people on their road, then they have that connection even to a church which is a little way from them. Again, it's sharing it out. It's not quite as strategic as saying we're going to do it in this area, but you're doing it within the immediate area of someone who's at your church. And I think that's a really powerful way of reaching out to sort of people they may know a little bit and building those relationships there within their community, even if it's not your church's immediate community. And I think, again, going back to the context of different churches, so thinking of a couple of examples that I've been involved with. So when I was down at Lansdowne Church in Bournemouth, we did a lot with students. We were in a very studenty area, and it wasn't the campus, but it was very close to where a lot of the students were living. So one of the things that we do each September would be to either do something as a church or be involved with the CU in helping people to move in. And
that's a really nice idea.
Yeah, it was really cool and a great way to like make connections with people that you'd never have met otherwise. So with the CU going and sort of physically helping people load stuff out of the cars onto trolleys into their rooms and then leaving them with something. Now, in the past, the CU had done is in Bournemouth, so they did beach balls one year.
Nice.
In fact, so slight aside, but there was a game invented called Buku after Bournemouth University CU, as it was called at the time, where people were playing Buku with these beach balls. There was other stuff, like I think one year they did frisbees, they did all sorts of different things, and that was great to leave something with them. Yeah. Obviously a gift, but also some print publicity as a reminder and a way to connect them in. When we were doing it with the church, we weren't able to help on the day one year, but what we did a couple of days before is we went in and we left a bag of donuts in every room in those halls, and obviously there were hundreds, along with, I think it literally just said, "Welcome to Bournemouth, we love students," something like that, and had a QR code on it. Oh. And that took them to a video welcoming them and telling them a little bit about what we did as a church. I mean, if you can't buy people with donuts, then I don't know what you can do. But that was that church's context. If I then think to the church I grew up at I say a little village. Actually, it's a village, but one of the biggest villages in the country. We had a missions week one year where it was the aim of the church to at least put something through the door of every house in the village, and hopefully have conversations with that. And so I was part of the team, and we went round as twos and threes. And there's still relationships I built up with the mission team from, as we've said, just being able to chat together and pray together whilst doing that. But also we had some really great conversations. So there were people who came into the church who were Christians but hadn't been in a church for years and years and years, because we knocked on their door and they were left with some print publicity which they could then get in touch and follow up with. So obviously we want to meet people, obviously we want to share with people. That's not just evangelism outreach. Sometimes it is rebuilding those connections that have lost. But that was what it looked like in the village. That's going to look like different for all sorts of different churches. Yeah.
Actually, this is it's not an experience. I've had an idea actually. So my town, we have like no students or no uni students, so that doesn't work for us. No. But I was thinking like, what could we do? We've had stuff like the Easter, Good Friday kind of walk of witness, and this year there were people walking past, and I was just thinking it would be really cool to hand out a kind of like, hey, this is the churches together, this is why we're doing it. And we're going to talk about kind of like tracts and stuff that might make a bit more sense, but I think of just like, hey, this is us, that if people are walking past asking what's going on here, that you can give something out. But coming up, I've got my local town carnival in Swanage, and I'm just saying, apparently it is the best carnival in the south, I believe. It is epic.
Big claim.
No, it's good. And the Swanage churches together are planning, I believe, on doing something. We did it last year. And I was just thinking like, what could we do? Flyers don't really work because you're walking at pace, and also like tends to be a lot of the kids right at the front. But what we could do is get printed on a fairly large flyer, like a QR code or something, because either people will take pictures of it, but also the amount of pictures that are then of the carnival and therefore of us, like that could be quite a good thing. So I'm going to have to suggest that. But of just like thinking what works in that context, well, flyering was not going to work in that, but actually could we do something like a one print thing that allows people to engage and find out more? So yeah,
and I think thinking of your context hopefully will give ideas. Like there are only so many suggestions that we can give, and we try and keep it sort of fairly general. But hopefully thinking of your context will give you those specific ideas, because even if it is just a small opportunity, you know, even if you've not actually got someone to open the door and had a conversation, even if it's just something through their letterbox, even if they throw it away pretty sharpish, that is an interaction. So even those small interactions can help to remind them that the local church is there and that you are interested in reaching out to them. You know, it may not impact them on a really deep level, but it probably will impact them more than if they just kind of happen to see a social media post, and there's no guarantee that they'd even see that if they're connected to your church and following your church accounts, because it depends on what they're shown.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got the reverse situation, but I think it's a good thing to think about. So in the run-up to the election that we've recently had, my husband received a number of letters, flyers and promotional literature from one of the specific candidates in a fairly short space of time, and it got to a point where he was getting actually quite annoyed with it. However, he did read through the first few bits that came through, and he did end up voting for them because that's what he wanted to do. But it did make me think, like, let's not over distribute to a point where we're annoying people. You know, don't put something through the door every 2 minutes. But actually, the fact that there was something coming through at least started sparking ideas and thoughts that allows people to kind of have an idea as to what's going on. So don't sort of come across as desperate, but gently signpost to things, you know, once or twice a year, I think actually can be really helpful.
Yeah, and it's part of your overall strategy. You're not going to say, right, we're doing this, so we're completely canning off all of our online stuff and we're deleting our website. But if it's just one occasional little touch point, rather than, like hammering it home repeatedly to the point people do get annoyed. Like, I mean, I even get that with like takeaway leaflets. Like, how many times are you going to deliver me this same menu? Either I've seen it and put it in a drawer and kind of forgot, or I've seen it and thought, now I already order from another one, so I'm not going to order from you. What's the point of that repeated again and again and again and again? But actually, if they put it through once every couple of years, it might go, oh, I'd forgotten about that one, I'll give it a try.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So even if it is only a very brief interaction that they have of reading or not reading whatever you've put through the letterbox, actually it's even more important to think about exactly what's going on, your publicity, and, you know, thinking carefully about what you want to present to people. Yeah,
for sure. So this was actually, I was sitting at my mum and dad's the other week, and dad sort of showed me a JW leaflet that had come through and was saying, okay, it was on incredibly thin paper, which just, if nothing else, speaks to the quantity of the things that they're putting out. But actually saying, I think this is better than our church leaflet. And again, this isn't to single out and say they had a bad leaflet, but if you look at the sort of thing that they were giving to people, or potentially going door to door and putting through people's doors, it was just too much. It was like a whole breakdown of the church's doctrine, like step by step. And there's a place for that, and we'll come on to that. But that first contact through people's door is not that. Whereas the JW leaflet goes straight to the heart and says something about suffering. You know, it gets to what people are actually struggling with and explains that. And we might disagree with a lot of the theology, but actually the strategy was bang on. And the chances are that strategy is what they use because it works and because it connects with people. So having it really focused, and whether that's about a key issue that they're struggling with, it might be that it's focused towards sort of cost of living or something like that, or hurts and that people are going through. It might be that it is specifically inviting to something and it's not about one of those deeper issues, but just having it focused on what it is, rather than saying, here's who we are, going on and on and on and on about yourself, but actually not giving any reason for them to care, because there's no reason for them to respond to it. And even if they were interested, like, what are you actually asking them to do? You're just speaking about yourselves.
Yeah. No, and I think the easy thing to do is to just talk about ourselves. So I think it's really important to think about, especially if this is your first time doing a campaign for a while, you know, keep it simple, keep it relevant. You know, you don't have to go and talk about all that stuff. Just, you know, think about the actions you want someone to take. You know, what's the next step you want them to do? So it might be visiting for something specific, or just signposting to the website to find out more as what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can also use door-to-door as an opportunity to ask if people would like prayer, and that can be, obviously, that in itself is an amazing thing to do, but it can be a great way to sort of build deeper connections with people. And so in the example that I gave earlier of our village doing that outreach, ahead of the door knocking going on, a leaflet would go through a week or two before saying, we're going to be knocking around this time or this date. We'd love to know if there's anything we can pray for you. And we had conversations with people saying, oh, I saw that. And it kind of just lays the groundwork and plants that seed, and means that maybe people are slightly more receptive to it. And actually, if they're not, then they're not just taken off guard on their doorstep and like feel put out, but you've warned them that that's what's going to happen.
It could also be worth sort of using these opportunities to connect with your local community about projects or ministries that you have going on. It could be your, you know, local youth groups, parent-toddler groups, or even something like a food bank. You know, maybe the person that you're speaking to does or does not need it. And to be honest, there's no need to pry into that. But at least informing them, at least they then know about it. They've got that information, and perhaps it might be they want to support it. I've seen people posting in our local community groups who are going, how do I give to the food bank? So actually knowing how they can support it if they're in a position to do that, or they may need it, or they may know someone who needs it, so they can pass on that information to those that might do. But I think the important thing to remember is that at least they know you're doing something or that you're involved in something, because very often it can be easy to think that the church isn't involved in anything in the community.
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, it's that thing of just because the church is doing something doesn't mean that people know about it. So you could be doing amazing things, but I think we shy away from shouting about that in the name of pride or whatever, I don't know, because we're worried that people are going to think that we're only shouting about it. Because, you know, we're doing it for the right reasons, but it's not wrong to tell people that we're doing it, especially if those are people who can benefit from it. Yeah. So even if it might seem a bit outdated, even if it might seem daunting, and, you know, we've acknowledged there is a cost to it, it can still definitely be worth considering door-to-door as one method of putting your print out there to people in your community.
As well as door-to-door flyers or leaflets, there are a number of other types of print that are worth thinking about. One of the first questions you do need to reflect upon, though, is where do they actually sit within your comm strategy? Yeah,
I think it's acknowledging that one piece of print doesn't have to do everything.
No.
So we mentioned about having a sort of leaflet or a brochure that describes a bit more about what your church believes, who you are, maybe your doctrine. That can be really useful, as long as you acknowledge that this probably isn't something you want to just give to people on first contact. This is more about people who are visiting the church and want to find out more. Maybe it's something that you can give to someone who's been to the church a few times and is thinking about getting involved. And essentially, this is a condensed version of your website and the beliefs page on your website, maybe the About Us page. It doesn't have to have a full history of your church, but actually having a paragraph about how long the church has been there and what it was founded on might be helpful. But I think thinking of the person who's reading it and what they're likely to need, so the sorts of questions they might have if they're thinking about joining the church. And it might be useful to have information on different ministries here, or it might be useful to separate that out. So I've seen churches use welcome packs quite effectively, where they might have a few of them made up, but also they have individual leaflets within these packs that they can just grab and give to people. So that if you see someone with a young family come in, it might be that you grab like a general leaflet and then put inside that something about the youth groups, something about the toddler groups. But other people might get different things. So it's an overview of the things that you do that can be personalised to people as well. But again, this isn't something that you're just going to hand out randomly to someone on the street.
Yeah. And for those visitors within your church, you know, even if it's just a condensed sort of business card with a few key details as a reminder, and a link to your website, and, you know, maybe key service times if you do kind of 9-10:30 and an evening service or something like that. And
a quick reference sort of thing.
And if you're including a link to your website, it doesn't, and to be honest, it shouldn't be your homepage. Why not have a specific welcome to the church page that has, again, all those key details and similar information to the brochure, and even a form to sign up to, whether you have newsletters or sort of email lists. And it's a great way of having it as a next step on the path of joining the church, keeps them moving along it rather than just looking at the homepage and, okay, that's the homepage, rather than key details, and then they never really either visit it again, or actually it doesn't give them the information that they might want or need. Having it actually, again, as a specific welcome page, I think it seems a lot more intentional and a lot more welcoming to someone who might have those questions of what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's just about making it easy for people. So I would generally recommend that churches have a welcome page on their site anyway, and that would be one of the things which is linked very prominently on the homepage for people who are just coming there fresh. But yeah, just having that as a landing page that people can go directly to as well can be really useful. And I think all of this, it goes for everything, but especially for print, it's about having the right information for the right people at the right time. So we might also think about a newsletter or a bulletin that people receive as they come into church. And some people still really enjoy having that physical handout, whether that's with this week's events or this month's events. There's a lot of churches are moving towards more of like a monthly format where it doesn't have to be updated as much. Or it might have some sort of points for the sermon and space for notes for that day. You can combine those. You can have like a daily handout and a monthly handout, so you're not having to update every week and do everything, you know. So I think that can be really helpful, especially for people who find this useful. At the same time, we are seeing less of this, particularly as email newsletters are becoming more common, and can kind of fill that gap in terms of keeping people who are there every week a little bit more in the loop of what's going on. But it might be something you still want to consider. I think, again, with all of this, it's about trying to figure out whether the effort that it takes to produce it every week is worth it for the people who want it and who value it. And yeah, that goes beyond the bulletin. I've had clients in the past who wanted to have their website in a way where they could update it every week to have the preacher and the Bible passage for the next week's services. And it wasn't a huge admin task, but realistically, there wasn't really anyone who was using it and benefiting from it. And the people who will probably hear it on the Sunday anyway, as we say who's coming to preach next week. So ultimately, they decided it wasn't sustainable for them, even as that small job. It was another thing to do every week, another thing for someone to do. So they decided to then change that and just keep it to information for Sundays that wouldn't go out of date quite as quickly.
Yeah. So rather than the frequent tasks that then become unsustainable, what can be worth doing is focusing efforts for print on a specific event, whether that is posters and flyers for that specific event. But actually, one thing at the event that can be really effective are response cards, and allowing time either during or sort of at the end of an event. And even you could say, right, everyone now fill it out. No one can sort of avoid it then. You can't say, oh, I didn't have time to do it. But it's particularly important to think about if you've got a large event with a lot of guests. Actually it can be really helpful of gathering, it's not about gathering details, but if people want to find out more and stuff, make it really easy for them to respond, and then make sure you follow up with them. Obviously print doesn't have to be the only way. It can be a very helpful way that you could have, response cards, but then also have a link where, you can either have it signposted around the building or show it on screens, even include a QR code. And really that then just covers all bases and makes it as easy as possible. So there's no excuses for people not to fill out their details of whatever you're wanting to get from them. Obviously relevant information. And, Don't forget to give them options, you know, if they want to go on mailing lists for future events, if there's something that they want to be prayed for, or even excitingly, perhaps they, you know, are ready to think further about giving their lives to Christ, and you know, they want someone to talk about it, and they just want to find out, and maybe that we do want to start coming to church or something. But essentially, make sure you're giving people options, and really, once you've done it for one event, you can just then kind of like use that template to then for any other events.
You don't necessarily need to personalize that response card or the web page to a specific event. It's something that you can use.
Yeah.
Could be that it's there for every service, but that just in those events you are drawing attention to it. And I think that drawing attention to it, giving people the time to fill it out and giving them the options, these aren't things we're doing to coerce people, but actually by acknowledging it and asking for it and then giving that space for it, it does help to give people, it's that thing of like doing something confidently and leading people by example, and then people will respond to that. So I've seen it where the people leading these evangelistic events will actually step away from the mic and they will take that time to fill out the response card for themselves as well, just to encourage people to do it. They've asked people beforehand, like, if you're inviting a guest, please fill out a response card at that point. And it might then mean that your guest doesn't feel quite so awkward about filling it out because everyone else around them is doing it as well.
Another thing to think about are tracts. This can be ideal if you've had a kind of brief conversation about the gospel, or if you're out on talks or something, and you know, even if you've got a bookstall or a stand at a local fair, it can be just great of giving people a bit more information about what we're about effectively. I think the important thing is to avoid overly cheesy Christianese language and stuff, you know, something that we find.
It's not even just the Christianese language, it's the like the tracts which look like a £50 note, and when you pick it up and then it's got like,
yes, I think I've got one of them somewhere. I mean, that was theologically questionable anyway.
Well, there's that, but I think there's often stuff that we go, oh, that's quite funny, and like, you know, people just roll their eyes at it, and just because we find it funny doesn't mean that everyone else is going to value it. It might be the opposite. It might kind of be too much of like an inside joke,
damaging than helpful.
Yeah, I've seen people like complaining on social media about these sorts of things, and
it's a bit cringe. To keep it relevant is really helpful. You know, Lydia in episode 35 mentioned about having their tracks themed around the coronation. You know, that's topical. People can kind of get their head around the idea of a coronation because that's going on, and actually it's a lot more kind of contextual. Okay. It might seem a little bit obvious, but sometimes, you know, obvious is kind of the most useful. Something around Christmas time, use Christmas themed stuff, because that's why we're celebrating it. So why not do something that, again, people can kind of get their head around it, or at least they can start piecing those pieces of the puzzle together.
But as with anything, like having tracts and good tracts and relevant tracts, that isn't a replacement for conversation. It isn't a case of here's something that you can shove into people's hands as they walk by and you don't have to interact with them. It's more about them being a sort of thought-provoking next step after you have made that contact with someone. And also, where appropriate, share your contact details so that they can get in touch, either with you, if you want to be able to do that, or if not, at least with the church. So that if they want to go deeper, they can do that. And again, little church business card might be helpful here, that if you've not got the details on the tract itself, you can give them the business card with that when you hand it out to them.
So we've mentioned kind of like big events or specific events, but I think actually one thing that we forget when trying to reach out into our community are the places where the community's gathering. So if that's a cafe or local library or community centres, why not think about putting a poster up, something evergreen rather than a specific event? Though if you've got kind of a specific big event where actually you do want a lot of people to come to, that can be worth considering. But I think just sort of putting out, hey, we're here, we meet on these times, and kind of keeping it, again, simple and relevant and brief, but actually letting people know that you're open and there are people there. You know, it's an invitation to come to church, and to say kind of like what's going on in the regular gatherings that may happen. Most of the time people are happy to display, generally, I think, you know, but ask, don't what's this phrase? Seek forgiveness rather than permission. I don't think in this situation that's a good thing. I think it is good to go in asking if you can do it. And actually, it's just another chance to build relationships with those in your local community and say, hi, this is us, this is what we do. And you never know what might come from that.
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many different ideas for print that we won't have time to mention today, and feel free to get in touch and share what's been effective for you, and that's something we can talk about in the future. But the last example is signage, and it's really easy to forget this, but signage is something which almost every church has, and it's so often something that we see not done very well. It could be that you've got too many details, or that you've got information on there which goes out of date too quickly. And so even sometimes, if your service times are changing relatively often, maybe you're in that sort of phase as a church, maybe leave them off of the signage for now, because it's better to not have them there than to have things at wrong times and people turn up and just be embarrassed. So keep it simple, have your church logo and name, have some contact details. Potentially you might want to have an email or a phone number, but critically have your website on there, because that is something you can keep up to date. And so if stuff changes, people can go to the website and see the most up-to-date information. And generally that is where people are going to go for the most authoritative information anyway. They expect that to be up to date. We've definitely talked about keeping your church website up to date in other episodes. But the point is just to grab people's attention as they walk past and give them the step they need to find out more. 9 times out of 10, that is going to be the website. And then if you do have additional space for things like posters, these are things which can be changed more often, so they don't have to be as permanent. But just think carefully about what you're including and what it says about your church. If you're going to have just a Bible verse on its own, I don't have a problem with that, but think really carefully about what verses you're putting there, and try to avoid the most cheesy, overly stocky photography backgrounds that you can. There are plenty of well-designed posters out there if you're not going to do your own. Just think carefully about it, because again, it's that thing of communication isn't just what you're saying, it's a two-way thing, and it's about what people are hearing. And you might put what you think is a lovely verse there, but if they're going, oh, that's twee and has no relevance to my lives, then maybe there was something that could have been better. Yeah.
I mean, we don't need to go into a great amount of detail talking about designing posters, flyers, anything really, because we've done a whole episode on it, speaking in episode 9 on terrible church posters / flyers. You really don't have to be an expert or have expert software. Canva offers plenty of templates, styles, features, and so many different things within it. It's really advancing very rapidly, that you can create all sorts of things, whether that is flyers, banners, posters, handouts, really anything else that you can think of. I have actually recently done a training trio webinar on Canva, so we'll link them in the episode description, but essentially I go through how easy it is to use Canva, especially from a church, with a church context of using it. I think the key is simplicity, knowing what you want to get across, keeping it on brand, which will help you to cut down as you build, which will help you to cut down on time as you've got templates and you establish kind of the branding that you want to use. But it's also not overcomplicating it, making it as easy to make, but also as easy to read. I think keep your main aim in mind, focusing on your design towards a simple call to action.
Yeah. And again, listen back to that episode. We'll put that in the episode notes there, so that you can go and listen back to that one, where we speak a lot more about print graphic design and how to do that well. Yeah.
But if the design aspect is something that that you struggle with, it could be a better use of time, effort and resources to speak to a designer. Or even if you think that you're doing okay and you're comfortable with it, why not get a little bit of outside input from time to time, whether that's asking a designer directly or posting it into a group like the Church Comms Collective. Or even you could send it to us. We'd be very happy to give some feedback, because we see so many posters that have been, I don't want to say they've not been care put in them, because I'm sure that there has been, but they are just designed quite poorly, and it's very frustrating. And really, with a little bit of feedback and a little bit of support and guidance, actually they could be really improved and, you know, actually makes them so much more effective in the purpose of trying to promote something.
Yeah. And that guidance, whether it's from us or others, I hope it would always be delivered gently, but also actually received well. I think with any aspect of church comms, and to be honest, any ministry within church, it can be really tempting to just hold things too closely or to be a bit precious over them. In my experience, this is especially the case when it involves creating something visually, like graphic design or with web design. And it's never our intention to shoot anyone down or to say you're not good enough. Because generally speaking, comms people do an amazing job with an amazing heart. Most of the time, they're giving their time freely and they're doing it off their own back. So we absolutely want to celebrate that. But we also want to help you to do things with excellence, as we started off this series thinking about, and what is the whole heart behind this podcast of doing things to the best of our abilities to bring glory to God.
And with that, we are rounding out episode 49, which can mean only one thing. Join us next week as we celebrate our half a century of gourds and pomegranates.